Greetings, everyone. Did you get two pieces of paper, two different pieces of paper as you come in? Okay, good. Welcome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Corpus Christi. I'm excited about the results that we're going to present in a few moments. This past May, we conducted this parish survey to check the effectiveness of what we're doing here as church at Corpus Christi. And I wanted to see what your thoughts and feelings about how we're programming and how we need to move forward. And I know that I had said this before, I wanted to meet with each of you, and I know that it's kind of hard in a 2,200 parish family. As your pastor, I want to thank all of you for taking the survey. For those watching online who took the survey, it really helped us. I think the final number was 673 people that filled out a survey, whether it was online or in person. Tonight's presenter is Jonathan Wiggins. He's a member of CARA, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, which is a nationally recognized Catholic research center. And so he's going to be speaking about the details a little bit more in detail. I know that we have given information online and also in the parish bulletin 2 weeks ago, so this is a little bit more information than those two. So you should have two pieces of paper as you walked in today. At the end of the presentation, we will have opportunity to ask questions and to have discussion, and so without further ado, I'd like to present Jonathan Wiggins.
Okay, and everyone can hear me? Okay, great. Well, thank you. Welcome. And let's go ahead and start with the first slide. All right. And as Father said, we're really gonna look at a lot of numbers today. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of DC humor because I come from DC. So it seems that there was a architect, a surgeon, and a politician arguing about who had the oldest profession. The first one to speak was the surgeon. He says, it's right there in the book of Genesis. God took a rib from Adam to create Eve. That's surgery. I have the oldest profession. Well, the architect is having none of that. He says, go back further in the book of Genesis, and you'll see at first there was chaos. And from the chaos, God created the heavens and the earth. Taking chaos and rearranging it, that's architecture. And the politician is just sitting there, and he says, where do you think the chaos came from? Anyway, and there's some truth there. And I like that joke because that data sheet, one of those, there's a lot of numbers. And so what I'm going to help try and do today is try and make some sense of all the chaos of all those numbers. Right, and next slide. Okay, and it's a little bit hard to see that. I'm just going to announce at this point, though, that it probably makes the most sense for us with this size of group to save the questions for the end, and we can go back to anything. But if there's something that has to be said, go right ahead. And the next slide, please. All right, that is what our offices at Georgetown look like. And the next slide. All right, so Kara and I, hello. Okay, makes sense. Kara and I were born in 1964, and it was during the Second Vatican Council, and the idea behind it was the Vatican Council said areas of the world that should have some kind of a research group to give data to church leaders so they make better decisions. And so that's where we were born from. It was a bunch of dioceses and religious orders that came together and gave us the startup money. But our jobs at CARA, we're not a think tank. We really, we're client-based, so a diocese or the bishop's conference or a parish comes to us, and we from there, we develop the survey and we give them the data back. And it's my job to find the patterns in the data, but it's not my job to interpret the data. And so when we talk about the music or the sense of hospitality, I've never been to a mass here. You have. You really can interpret this data much more richly than I can. Next slide. All right, and as Father was saying, we had 673 valid responses. So the survey was developed. All these questions were ones that the parish chose to do. And basically, the thing to know is that this is a mass attender survey. It's not a registered parishioner survey. And what that means is there are lots of parishioners, or lots of registered parishioners who may not darken the doors that are not represented here if they didn't respond to the survey. And there's also people who aren't registered here but come here all the time that are here. And so, if you will, we're starting with what's here, the group that's here. Those are the people that this survey is tapping into. And online, not just ones who are here, but the people who are watching online. So for example, if we were going to do a stewardship survey, we might do a household survey and send it out to every household. But this is a different kind of survey because in the same household, one person may love the music and one may not. One person may love the homilies, one may not, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is that we hear from everyone as much as possible. All right, and in a few slides, I will talk about the margin of error with that 673. But next slide. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to invite you to grab the single sheet that you grabbed on your way in, and we call this our data sheet. All right, and if you will, most of the findings in the whole report are on this little sheet of paper. And so if you look at the first question, for example, right above it is poor, fair, good, and excellent. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you look at the first question. There's 4 columns, and then there's an NR for non-response. All those numbers there are percentages. And the 1 through 4 all equal 100%. So we took the non-response out separately. So when you compare these, you're looking at, you can compare question 1 to question 39 by the way we did it. And we do it for the same reason. So say you were back in high school, which is a scary thought, but say you're back in high school and you have a paper that was worth 50 points, and you have a test that's worth 100, and you're wondering, which one did I do better on? In order to figure it out, you'd have to double the score on the paper, so they're both out of 100. So that's why we make all of them equal 100, so you can compare one to the other no matter what the non-response. Because if you look, that first section has really low non-responses. That NR, that column that's all italicized. But if you go down to questions 18 to 24, it jumps up. Why does it jump up? 17 to 24. Why does it jump up? It jumps up because a lot of people don't know how to answer about some of the formation programs. If you don't have children who are in preparing for First Communion or reconciliation, for example. So it's perfectly all right, but it's not hidden. It's just it's here. And then you'll notice the highest non-response rates are questions 37 to 57, and in particular 51 and 52. So 3 out of 4 people were not able to answer the question about those with addictions and single parents. How well does the parish reach out to them? And that would make sense as well, perhaps. And it might be it makes sense, or it might be, we have a good program, we're not getting the word out very well. So those non-responses are a little bit tricky that way. Question 58 looks at communication preferences, and you pick 3. And then we're going to go over most of the rest of this, but if you flip it over to the next slide, we have different response categories. So from none or not at all to very or very much. And we're not going to cover this today because we're really looking more at the evaluative questions and the amount of time we have. But as you can see, there's also questions about how much priority and how important things are. And there's a lot of questions about agree or disagree. And finally, I'm going to draw your attention to question 91. We don't cover that as well, but basically 3 of 4, 74% of people that have children of that age say they would rather have the CCD classes be in class versus the 1/4, 26%, who said they'd rather have family CCD sessions. All right. So when you go home and you have any questions, This is a really handy sheet. It just has a lot of information in a single sheet. And so you want to make sure you have that when you go home. Let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to talk briefly about the margin of error. So 673 respondents gave us a margin of error of 3.7%. So we're going to round that up to 4. Now, you hear about margin of error a lot, and I just want to give you some practical applications for this particular survey. So if you look at questions 2 and question 11, you can see that fourth column, 58%, gave an excellent rating to invitation to participate in parish life, versus number 11, where 42% gave an excellent to spreading the gospel message to others. If you go plus or minus there, you can see that no matter that 46% is the highest the bottom one can be, and 54 is the lowest. So you can say, you could say with good confidence that the invitation to participate in parish life is rated more highly than spreading the gospel message to others. On the other hand, sometimes it looks like there's a big enough one, but if you look at question 2 again and question 10, the difference there is 7 points, and that top one could come down to 54, and question number 10 could jump up to 55. So those two could flip-flop. So just making sure you understand what the margin of error means with a survey like this, and this is just for the overall findings, where it's 4%. All right, and next slide, please. All right, and who's in the pews? And next slide. Great, and so we have here the age groups. And so we have 2 subgroup analyses we do throughout the entire report. One of them is for age groups, and one of them is for length of time at the parish. And for the age groups, you'll notice that about half are in that middle group. So they're 36 to 64 years old. So 51% of all the respondents who responded to this survey were in that group. About 43% were older adults, 65 and older, and only a smaller percentage, 6%, were younger adults. And that's important because we're going to see that the younger adults respond differently than the other 2 age groups. And it's good to know that they respond differently. At the same time, it's good to know that they're only 6% of the respondents, because we're not trying to make a mountain out of the molehill, but we are trying to notice the patterns. Next slide. All right. In spite of the fact this is a mass attender survey, 9 and 10, 89% of people were registered at the parish. So, in spite of that. And the next slide, this is the other big subgroup analysis, and this is the years at the parish. And if you look at the bottom part, the red and the blue, you'll see 41% of people who responded to the survey have been at the parish for 15 years or less. And the other 59% have been here for 16 years or more. And besides that, which is interesting in its own right, that blue group, which is the smallest part of the pie, they who have been here 5 years or less, they differ in their opinions from the other 3 groups. The other 3 groups tend to hang together, but that group is different. And we'll show you some findings as we go along here that will demonstrate that. And there's a lot more of them in the report than what we're going to show. And the next slide, please. We asked 2 questions. How often do you go to Mass in church? How often do you live stream Mass? And I knew in the end of the day, you'd want to know what percentage of people go to church once a week or more. And so if you look at those top 2, the once a week, which is the light blue, and the orange, if you add those 2 together, you get 61%. So 61% go to Mass at least once a week. So once a week or more than once a week. And then another, what would it be, 37% go 1 to 3 times a month, and a very small group of those who responded go less often than once a month. It works out to about 2%, so 1 out of every 50. So we really are hearing from people who do come to the church quite a bit. And the next slide. All right, this is a question that we didn't have 5 years ago. After the pandemic, which of the following best describes how you plan to participate in the parish? And if the lion's share, 56% say they plan to go in person. On the other hand, 40% say they plan to attend both in person and by streaming. And then a small percentage, just 3%, say they only plan to attend online. And why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting for the parish to plan, but it's also interesting to think about. We are very much a community-based church, and we are very much a sacramental church. How do you provide the sacraments and formation and community to people who aren't coming regularly? It's a good question. Yes?
I'm sorry, I feel the need to ask something. You talked a lot about what the survey results are, and it represents a sample of our parish, 20-some%, you said, that's fine. The question is that sample representative of our parish, either of registered parishioners, of mass attendees, of others? What is the comparative statistic that says this is a representative sample?
So we don't, it's a mass attender survey. It's not a registered parishioner survey. There's no doubt about it. It was passed out at Mass. So people who don't come, so that is the group that...
But still look at statistics. What is the age distribution, for example, compared to the parish? And what is the mass attendance numbers as quoted there compared to what actually shows up in Mass? There are a number of things you could do to ask the question, is this sample representative?
Sure. I'm sorry. So sure. He would like you to use the microphone so everyone could hear. Is all. So he's asking a question that, all right, so how representative is this of the parish? And that is not something that my survey answers, but that is something that the parish could answer if you have good age data, for example, for the parish. We have no reason to think that the young people who come to Mass didn't respond. You could look around at the parish and get a pretty good idea of how many are under 35. I cannot. As I said, I'm able to present the patterns in the data. You are at this parish. You have real images and real data in mind. You can do things I cannot.
So if I could just say a few words about that. I think, the statistics for each parish and how many parishioners actually come to a parish is something that I think every parish struggles with, even before COVID started. And I know since COVID, it's really made it, I think every pastor is scrambling to try to figure out that data. We don't have a firm hold on it, but we do know that we have about 600, 650 that come each weekend to Mass, children, adults, everybody included. And then on live streaming, it's about 200 to 300. So that's kind of the consistent that we've had for the last year or so.
That's a better answer than mine. So thank you, Father. All right, let's go on to the next slide. And this is just to say we're going to move to a different type of question about parish life. And the next slide, please. All right, so among the people who come to the parish, 62% rate the parish overall as excellent, and 33% as good. So the good and excellent, because there's also poor and fair. We consider those the relatively positive end of the scale, and the poor and the fair, the relatively negative end. And if you will, the relatively negative end is about 5%, so 1 out of 20, and the relatively positive side is 19 out of 20. And there's quite a bit more, there's about 30% more that say excellent than say good from these people that responded to the survey. And the next slide as well. And this is a chance for us to see, I was talking about how those who are new to the parish seem to be different or differ some from others. And so if you look at the very first one there, it's those who have attended the parish for 5 years or less. And this is the percentage of them who said the parish overall was excellent. And you can see it's not a big drop, but it's about a 10% drop from that group to the other groups. And that's a pattern we saw come up a lot in the report. And so I'm not going to go over the whole report, obviously, but I'm going to make sure you see some examples of it as we go along. And the next slide, please. All right, we also asked 2 open-ended questions. So everything we've talked about so far has been quantitative, but this is qualitative. And in particular, this was, what is the greatest strength of the parish? And so people wrote in whatever they wanted to write in, and we tried to categorize them. Were they talking about leaders? Were they talking about worship? Were they talking about sense of community? What did they find to be the greatest strength? As you can see, this is in order of how frequently they appear. So you have leadership, sense of community, sense of welcome and inclusiveness, which is related to sense of community, and then worship-related strengths. So when we just asked them to write in off the top of their head what they liked best and what they found the greatest strength, that's what they identified. And the next slide is, what is the greatest challenge facing the parish? And in this case, the findings really dovetail well with the findings we're going to present in a little bit, because the greatest challenge is that first one, providing better outreach and ministry to parishioner groups. So people may have written in here better outreach to the divorced or separated, or to, to teenagers, whatever they wrote in. That's how we categorize those. This next one is unique to our time, because a lot of people are worried, will people come back to the parish after COVID? And will they be as involved again? And will they feel like they can talk without a mask, or are they too afraid? And so that was also expressed quite a few times. And then the leadership challenges and the worship-related challenges, you'll notice that they appeared on the strengths and they appear here. So there's definitely some people see it as the greatest strength, or one part of it is greatest strength of leadership or worship, and some people see it as one of the greatest challenges at the parish. And next slide. I want to leave plenty of time for a discussion as well. All right, here's another question that really is related to COVID. How connected do you currently feel to the parish? And 57%, which is almost 3 in 5, said they feel the same. There's no real difference how connected they feel to the parish. Among the others, there's 27% versus 16%. The 27% say they feel less connected to the parish, and the 16 say they feel more connected to the parish. And this is another opportunity for us to see that subgroup finding I was talking about in the next slide, because indeed, all 4 of the groups, whether you're at the parish for 5 years or less, 6 to 15, 16 to 25, or 26 or more, all of them feel as connected. There's a majority. There's 52% to 60%. On the other hand, if you look at that far one to the left there, and that blue, which is those who are at the parish for 5 years or less, you'll see that that group is more likely to, those people who have been here that long are more likely to say they feel more connected to the parish than the other groups. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along as well. Let's go to that next slide. All right, so if you look at the data sheet one more time, that single piece of paper, so questions 1 to 57 all use the exact same scale, poor to excellent. I took all of those items, I put them into one big table. And it's such a big table, it comes up in 4 slides. So this is going from highest to lowest. And so as you'll notice, the top one, friendliness of the pastor or priest, is 81%. All right, and then the next one is 74% for Christmas liturgies. What were the patterns that you see here, the topics that are mentioned, are leadership, which is the first item, and the 4th item, which is the friendliness of the parish office staff, and then the last item, the leadership provided by the pastor. And the other theme here, which dominates the slide, is worship, because we have Christmas and Easter liturgies, we have liturgical decorations, the reverent atmosphere, hospitality or sense of welcome, Lenten and Advent services. So if we were going to, we had that open-ended question, we asked what's the greatest strength, but the things that are coming out on top here really are the worship-related variables. All right, so this slide is the first of 4, so this is the highest. So that's, I call this the greatest. This next one, yes. Oops, go back a little bit. Looks like we jumped to the end almost. There we go. Medium high. So this would be the second of the 4. And what kind of topics are we seeing here? And this one goes from 50% to 59%. And again, we're seeing worship. We're seeing music. We're seeing lectors. We're seeing director of music, masses and liturgies, homilies. So we're seeing worship a lot on this slide. So it's the thing that's really coming out very, very high. We're also seeing a lot of faith formation here. So we have the DRE, sacramental prep. We have, for children and youth, as well as for First Communion, we have youth minister, and children's religious education programs. So that, and one last thing to notice is, third from the bottom, is outreach to and advocacy for those in need. This is the first time we've seen the word outreach, and it's a pretty good chunk of the survey. It's from questions 36 to 57. So we have an expectation what we're going to be seeing on the subsequent slides. And let's go to that next one. And if this was medium high, I'd call this one medium low. And what are we seeing here? The themes, this is the first time sense of community has popped up. But then, if you look towards the bottom of that slide, there's a variety of things on the top, but on the bottom, we're really seeing outreach. So whether it's outreach outright or spreading the gospel message to others, which is evangelization, which is another type of outreach, that's really dominating that bottom part of the table. And I'm sorry, hopefully you can see at least that it has a lot of outreach there. And last slide, so this is the lowest. And recall that the highest one was 81%, and here the lowest one is 20%. So this is quite a big drop. This is just the excellence. If we did the positive, it wouldn't be so low. But this is just the excellence. This gives us a chance to say what the strengths are and what the areas of improvement are. And what's dominated here is the word outreach. So outreach to different kinds of groups. So the lowest one is LGBTQ persons, and then inactive Catholics, single adults, those divorced and separated, those with addictions. So these are the lowest. Yes? So, wait, do we want to do this? I'm sorry.
So outreach can mean you and I getting together, and obviously COVID stopped a lot of outreach programs. Is there any benchmarking of these results against other parishes, or national numbers pre-COVID?
There is in the survey, and our data goes back pretty far back to when I started at CARA, which would have been in around 2000. And we've had fewer and fewer parish surveys to compare to. And so that's one caveat. I like to be very honest. And the other caveat is that parishes who approach us to do surveys tend to be ones that are doing well. I wish that the parishes that were doing horrible would come to us, but it tends to be parishes who are doing well. So when we're comparing you, we don't have that. No one has that kind of national data. We have what we have, and it helps you give you a benchmark. But since this was done after COVID, it's really hard to compare because COVID has changed the American landscape and the American religious landscape without a doubt. Great question. Great question. All right. So moving on to that next slide, this is some demonstration. I said, so we looked at those who have been at the parish for 5 years or less. This is showing those who are age 16 to 35. The other dominant pattern throughout the survey was that group was more positive than the other groups. So in this case, it's 2 formation programs that they're the blue, and they rate faith formation for adults and children's religious education higher, as well as social activities. And so this is not something I can tell you. what's going on, but this is something you likely have some idea about from conversations you've had. And we're going to welcome those that kind of discussion as we move along. And one more example of that is the next slide, which is excellent evaluations of outreach to groups. And again, it's that youngest generation that just that is much higher. So it's whether it's visitors and guests or new parishioners or those sick or homebound. And in particular, that last item, those sick or homebound, you would imagine that the older group might have a better idea because they have friends, maybe more likely to have friends in that group. But it's the youngest group that is most likely to rate it as excellent. And yes? They are. They're only 6%. It doesn't tell you very much, but it does tell you that they're having a different experience, perhaps, or maybe they just don't have the depth of experience or the ability to compare, such a long time. But a 35-year-old, I would imagine some of them have been to the parish I know that some of them have been to the parish for a while because I did that cross tabulation. Yes? Mm-hmm. Nice and loud.
Is there a strong correlation for that group and baptism? So a lot of parents are back into church like having kids, so it might be
Yeah, you better say that.
So is there a big correlation between the younger group and baptisms? Because a lot of parents come back into the church when they're having kids.
Yeah.
To be baptized or whatever. So, I think it's very positive to see that, and that's one of the great things. It's an opportunity to bring people back in when they have young children. So,
and we cannot say that because we did not ask how many people when they, how frequently or when they last had a family member baptized in the parish. We didn't ask that, but nationally, that is what you talked about has always been the trend. But lately, the nuns, a lot of the NONES, not the NUNS, have come from that group that don't indeed return. And it's not just the Catholic Church, it's straight across the religious landscape that's been happening. So I don't know if that's what's happening here, but I would guess that's what's happening here as well, unless there was some reason to think otherwise. But that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. My generation, that's how it happened. That's how it worked. And the next slide. All right, we're getting towards the end of what we're going to present here. And this is just a really useful one about the time of the week regularly most available. So we asked people, we gave them 4 choices, which were weekday evenings after the Mass you attend, Saturday mornings and Saturday afternoons. And overall, which is that the blue bars there, overall, weekday evenings is the most popular. All right, and then second to that would be after the Mass you attend. And then only about 1 in 20 each say Saturday mornings or Saturday afternoons. But if you look at that second bar, which is the red one, you can see that those who are aged 16 to 35, a majority of them, 56%, say after the Mass they attend is when they are regularly most available to come to parish functions. So they do differ in that way. All right, and let's go to the next slide. All right, and the other big document you have is something I put together. So this is extra from the report. And most parishes, if you ask them what's one of the dominant things they want people to be more involved in parish life. They want them to come to Mass more often, and they want them to be more involved in the programs, et cetera, et cetera. So I looked at the survey, and this is from my research point of view, not from your point of view, and I picked out all the items that I feel are related to involvement. And I put them all together in this short little 26-page document, because it's one thing when it's over 90 pages, but sometimes when you read things right next to each other, you make connections that you wouldn't have made otherwise. And I'm gonna do a big push here. If, for example, if you were interested in communication or worship or faith formation, this is something you could do as well. This is one I did on a popular topic, but I wouldn't even know what topics are most salient for folks, but this would be a good example of one. And so you can see we start out with those evaluative questions, and we present the combined positive, the good and the excellent, as well as the excellent only. And then if you just, we're not going to go over this in detail, obviously, because it's a long document, but if you go to page 3, we have from page 3 to page 6, all these are age group findings related to those topics that I say are related to involvement. So you have all the data right here to read through, and when you read through it, you're going to see something very different than what I saw. And then page 7, we have for those same ones, page 7 and 8, all those differences at the parish for 5 years or less. All right, so rather than belabor and go through this, because it has some findings in there, so I'm going to welcome you to read it, at the end, I looked at all this, and from my research perspective and my time doing parish surveys for probably about 15 years, I came up with topics that I thought were interesting, looking at the findings side by side. So I'm gonna just direct you to some parts of it. But number one is outreach to particular groups are especially likely to be the least likely to get excellent ratings. Okay, we saw that up there. So knowing that a parish staff is limited in number and limited in resources and time, just like all of us are. How can a big parish reach out to all these different groups better? So that's a topic for discussion. You can't have the staff doing all of it. So how can you as a parish better reach out to different groups? So that's a good topic for discussion that really comes through if you read through this. And then also those two patterns of those who have been at the parish for 5 years or less and those that are 16 to 35. And granted, they're 11% and 6% of parishioners, so they're not huge. But why are they different? What makes that group different? And you would have some answers that I don't. But the related question is, why are the other groups lower? So there's two topics there. Why are they higher, and maybe why are the other group lower? So these would be good ones. Now I'm going to ask you to turn to page 14, which shows one of the findings that I showed in a slide about after the pandemic. How do you plan to participate? If you look at the top two, the 40% and the 3%, 43% plan to participate at least partially online. So we are a community-based Catholic church, and we are also a sacramentally based Catholic church. It raises the question for people who aren't going to be in the pews very often, how do we provide sacrament and how do we provide community? It's a challenge for the parish to figure out how that can be done the best you can do. And that's all you can do, of course, ultimately. But it's a good topic to think about. And that's all I'm doing is raising some topics, and it will lead maybe hopefully to some good discussion. Now, on pages 16 and 20, let's start with page 16. There's a big table there. The two bottom questions are about what prevents people from volunteering more for the parish. So you can see being a caretaker for someone and not being sure who to contact. So 38% and 24% somewhat or strongly agree with those, and 6 to 15%, those last two rows, strongly agree with those. So, and then page 20, so we talked about volunteering. Page 20 is an entire table devoted to how much do the following prevent you from contributing more financially. So looking at those two, how can the parish and how can you and how can the parish help people be able to be more involved, both volunteer-wise and financially? Those are the kind of topics that when I read this, seemed like good questions. And then I have one last example, and this is just a way you can use this data. So say you are somebody who thinks, boy, what we really need is more young people involved. And I think my nephew really likes retreats. Why don't we have a retreat? Now, if we were going to have a retreat, how would we do it? And if you, so how would we advertise it, and would it work? So I'm going to invite us to look at 3 pages. Page 10, which is about this other way. So that table there at the title, it's those who are ages 16 to 35. What are their top 3 ways they prefer to receive information? So if you were going to advertise it, you could see the top 5 of those. At least 27%, all the way up to 63% say this is how they most like to find out about parish programs. So that's how we would advertise it. Then page 18. If you follow me, and I'm sorry I'm making you do all this jumping around, but you have this. Yes? Wait, one more time, because he's going to bring.
So would one infer from page 10 then that those 16 to 35 are actually coming in person to Mass, if they're part of that percentage who attend Mass in person?
Yes, they are part of it, and you'll notice that online bulletin is the bottom rung of that. So you would think that if they were doing everything online, that they would be yeah. So you're absolutely right. There are people in that group, and the announcement was read at Mass is by far their favorite way to learn about things.
Thanks.
Yeah, great question. All right, page 18. We're going to look at that bottom line of the table. Providing retreat opportunities. So about half, 49% say that the parish should give somewhat or very much priority to that, which indicates that they have an interest in it, but only 12% say very much priority. So this might be a hard group to have a retreat for. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but it's good to know that up front. And finally, I'm going to ask us to look at page 22. The last thing we're going to look at in this particular document. And if you were going to advertise it and have a retreat, looking at that bottom table, when would it be best for you to have it? When are they most likely going to be available? It would be, for that age group, it would be after the Mass they attend. So what I'm wanting to say from this report is it has some big findings, but it also has some very practical findings. If you want to do something, it's good to refer and find out what's more likely to work. All right, and just a couple more slides. Next slide, please. I guess we're to the questions at this point. And so there's more of that report to read online in different places. But this is what we're going to stick with tonight because we're not going to be here too late. It is a weeknight, and there are not many that are 16 to 35. And there's also a ball game going on, so we have a lot of things going against us tonight. But good. Oh, Yankees did win. All right. I heard it was 5-1. So. All right. Well, any questions or any topics for discussion? How are we doing on time? I should be, okay, 1:45.
So I just want to say a couple of things. John, thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing the raw data. So this is the second time I've heard this presentation today, and what I'm gathering from this is really, it's a lot of information to be processed. It's not something we just come and say, here's the quick answers to our parish, what's going on in parish, what we need to do in the future. For me, this is a first step in reflecting with accurate information, with raw data of how we can move forward in a good way to best serve our people. Today at the staff meeting, they had pretty much the same presentation today, and I told them to take the report home, put it on your pillow and sleep on it. And I want you to have it by your side, and I want you to look at it on a regular basis to say, how can I use this data in my ministry? And moving forward, we're going to take the findings, we're going to process it as a staff, how we can move forward, how we can refine our efforts to reach people, and then a larger We have some of our parish council members, our newly forming parish council, which is going to start on November 19th on Saturday. We're going to meet 5 times a year, and I'm tasking them to take this material and, we want people back in the pews. We want more volunteers to step forward. We want people to actively participate. We want to get more groups up and running to serve people and to use this as a light in how to do that effectively in light of our mission to bring joy, hope, and healing to people. So I don't want you to leave here today thinking, okay, we got all this information thrown at us. The reality is this is just the first step. And maybe we could just go around if anybody has any questions on this. And yeah, let me just use the microphone so people online can hear you.
I gather that this questionnaire that we all completed was given out to other parishes. Was that specifically designed for Corpus Christi? Is that correct?
This is specifically designed for the parish. We have about I think 950 questions that the parish looked through and selected the ones that they thought were most useful for this parish.
Well, in making some comparisons, it appears to me that we have a high percentage of families or people who attend from about 50 on up, older people. And we can see ourselves, we just don't see the younger people attending masses, participating, etc. So comparing ourselves to other comparable sized parishes, how do we rate that way?
So this is the first survey that we've been able to do since COVID. So your parish was the first. We have several parishes that just kept kicking the can down the road. Yours was the first one to do it. And I would be loath to try and compare anyone post-COVID to pre-COVID because the religious landscape has changed. And so I can tell you that there are parishes that before COVID had a very small percentage that were in the young age group. But I really don't know what the landscape looks like. And I think the landscape will be different in 6 months than it is right now. But as I said, that bigger trend is that the people who were single and weren't coming to Mass, when they get married, they're not necessarily coming back at the percentage they did before. So I can tell you that, but I can't possibly compare it to anyone. It's just too different.
Any other questions? Comments?
All right.
So I just want to say, I think it's easy to get kind of lost in the data, but I think the reality is, as a parish, we're growing. What we've noticed over the last couple of months is that we see more and more young families coming with young kids, and that seems to be a trend at our parish more and more. So, our hope is to grow the parish. And we're very hopeful, and I just want to thank you for coming out tonight. You could be home watching the Yankees. Who won, you said? The statistics, there's a report online if you'd like to look at that. And again, this is not going to be the last piece of processing this, so I need your input. Please spend time looking over, processing, and putting pieces together, and this is just going to be an ongoing discussion for our parish, so I just want to thank you. Just to answer your question before, we received a list of 1,000 questions. There was a committee that I put together to pick the questions for our parish. Dr. Joe Barisi was part of that, Teresa Pick, Monsignor Mahoney. So it was about 15 people that did that, and so it was specifically designed for our parish. All right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep. So maybe we could end with a prayer. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of Corpus Christi. We thank you for this information that we've received. Help us to use it in a good way. Help us to move forward with hope and trust that you are leading our parish and that you still have good things in mind for us. Help us to be open to changing and to growing and to bring that joy, hope, and healing to all who come through our doors. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Father, the Son, and the Holy Holy Spirit. So John will be here if you'd like to ask some other questions further, and I'll be around too. Thank you.